Hi, my name is Jeff Kish. I'm with Network Solutions, and today we're going to be talking about disaster recovery strategies. So the first thing we want to do is talk about the fact that within our data center, not all workloads are created equal. Right? We have some workloads that if they go down during the day, that our business is impacted. We can't process financial information or orders or whatever the situation is that impacts our business. Some workloads, not so important. If they go down, a couple of users might complain, but ultimately we can process business as usual. It doesn't affect our day-to-day operations. So we're going to break down those workloads into 3 different tiers. And there are a lot of different models out there. Some places use 4 tiers, some will use 7 tiers. We're going to try to keep it a little bit simple and talk about 3 different tiers. So when we look at our tiers, we'll break it down into Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3. Tier 1 would be the most important, so the level of importance increases as you get closer to 1. So again, some places would use a Tier 4 as something that's truly like maybe test or development or something like that. But well, again, we're just going to keep it a little bit more simple. And if you haven't seen the previous video that we did on RPO and RTO and the definitions of that, feel free to check that out because that's a very important part of this whole conversation. So we're going to talk about RPO and RTO and the definitions within this strategy. We're going to assign RPOs and RTOs to each one of these tiers because ultimately that's what we care the most about, right? We care about how long it takes to get back online and how much data we've just lost. So again, if you haven't seen the video, if you're not familiar with that concept, recovery point objective, RPO, is how much data can I afford to lose, basically. It's how far back I have to go in the event of losing data. And RTO is how long can I afford to be down. So how long does it take to get back online in the event of a disaster? So we'll just kind of start at Tier 3 and work our way up and talk about that. So RPO for Tier 3, you're usually talking about nightly backups or something that's going to happen every 24 hours. So if we had to go back in time, we might actually lose up to 24 hours worth of data. And again, I took a backup last night. I have to recover from that. Maybe it's 5, 6, 7 o'clock at night the next day. So I've just lost up to 24 hours worth of data. How long does that take for me to get back online from an RTO perspective? Usually about 72 hours, something like that. So it just depends. I mean, obviously on the one hand, I could spin my first backup up pretty quickly and maybe I'm not taking 72 hours for that one, but to get all of my Tier 3 back online, it might take up to 72 hours. So getting to Tier 2, for example, now RPO, we're usually taking snapshots or doing something, and we're going to talk about strategies around this and the technologies we can deploy. But in some way, hopefully my recovery point, I don't have to go nearly as far back as 24 hours. So maybe we're talking about 2 hours. Something along those lines. And how long does it take to get back up? You know, again, usually in that 2 to 4 hour range, we'll say maybe 4 hours max. Some models will use 8 hours for that. It really depends on the organization. The reason why there's no standard for this is because it just depends on your individual organization, what you perceive to be. When you look at what your Tier 2 applications are, you have to decide, can I afford to lose 2 hours worth of data on that application, and can I afford to be down for 4 hours? Or hey, you know, if I can afford to be down 8 hours with those specific applications, then we can increase that, and that changes the way that we'll do the backup and the replication of that data. Tier 1, we want to get as close to 0 as possible. So we'll go ahead and write 15 minutes on here because that's pretty realistic. We can hit 15 minutes with different technologies, but ideally we're losing less data than 15 minutes. Ideally we're not down even for 15 minutes. If we can use technology that can get us back online instantly, for example, then you know maybe that's 15 to 30 seconds. Maybe it's 2 minutes instead of 15. But we have to set realistic goals and we have to set measurable goals, and so 15 minutes is pretty common to aim for a Tier 1. So this is where you really want to take your data center, your DR strategy, and look kind of where you are today. Look at breaking your workloads down into the different tiers. Define what your tiers are. You really have to start with that. Define what those tiers are, then take a look at your applications and put them into the individual tiers. So now let's just take a look at what can we do to achieve the RPO and RTOs that we're talking about. So, again, we're talking about different technologies. So what is our technology and what is our strategy for achieving these RPOs and RTOs? So, again, we'll start with, we got tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And tier 3, we're really talking about still, I'll draw a little moon and stars here. We're talking about nightly backups for the most part. So some kind of just backup running every single night to keep our data safe. This is where we're trying to achieve the RPO of 24 hours. We can do that with nightly backups. And keep in mind too that as we advance up with these technologies, it's going to be more expensive. We don't want to deploy tier 1 resiliency to tier 3 workloads because it just doesn't scale financially. So we're trying to be very cost efficient, cost-minded, I suppose, around this. We want to right-size the technology to the individual workloads and to the tiers. All right, so tier 2, there's a lot of different options as we get higher up this stack. So tier 2, we're talking a little bit about usually array level replication. So maybe you have a storage array on one side and you can replicate back and forth between 2 different storage arrays. This does typically require having the same brand of storage array on both sides of your link. So, if you have a NetApp storage array or a Pure array or a Nimble, something like that at both ends, then usually you can take advantage of a software suite. For example, SnapMirror within the NetApp suite would accomplish this. So we're talking about, in the event of a disaster, we've had our replication set up. The RPO is actually we've achieved probably less than 2 hours, which is good. The reason why it takes 4 hours to get it spun back up is because we have to spin up that volume, that backup volume. We maybe have to attach it to the ESXi host, and by the time that we have gotten it all back up and running, we might not have lost that much data, but it did take a little while to get back up. And so that's why it's important to have that level of resiliency at the tier 2 stage. All right, so from a tier 1 perspective, how in the world do we get 15 minutes of resiliency? This really comes down to DR software. So just lightning fast software that is designed for this. So the way I tend to describe it is, for a lot of individuals, we understand VMware fault tolerance. The idea is that I've got a clone of my virtual machine running on a different host. Hyper-V has the same concept. And so as soon as one host goes down, I can spin that virtual machine up on the other host instantly. I haven't lost any data, I haven't lost any time, maybe in that 15 to 30 second window, but ideally everything is back up and running very quickly. I haven't lost much data. The problem with those technologies is I cannot run those between the 2 different data centers. And so it has to be within a cluster at any one location. DR software, my favorite is Zerto. A lot of users will use VMware Site Recovery Manager. These DR software sets will accomplish that fault tolerance level and split it between the 2 data centers. One last point in all of this tiering strategy has a pretty big caveat. And that caveat is I need to have 2 different data centers. And if I don't have those 2 different data centers, we all, especially I'm an engineer, we as engineers like to think, hey, if I have to, I've got my data stored over there, I can go out and I can grab a server off the shelf, maybe I could even run to Best Buy and pick something up, something small, just get something up and running so that I can get back online, and I bet I can get us back online in 24 hours. It's just not realistic, unfortunately. If everything went perfectly smoothly and we had everything spun up, maybe 24 hours is really, I would say 72 hours is about the best we can do from any of these tiering workloads if we don't have a backup data center. And that backup data center has to have a storage array. It has to have servers ready to go. It doesn't have to be brand new servers. It can be old servers, but just something ready to roll in the event of a disaster. So hopefully this helps as you explore your own disaster recovery strategizing. Again, just kind of the process here. Number 1, define your RPOs and RTOs within your organization. Number 2, take a look at your individual virtual machine list, your workloads and applications, and split them into those individual tiers. And then number 3, we really want to look at the technologies that we're going to deploy in order to accomplish that. So thank you very much for listening. Have a good day.